been with us through this process for the last year or two, that much of the principles that Samantha has already covered and that I'm about to cover, you'll see them in our POCs, the results of our technical assessment memoranda, both the previous cohort and the current cohorted process as we start to release that material. In the bootcamp presentations we've had together over the past 2 years, and certainly in the technical industry research review and commentary, volumes 1 and 2, you'll see many of these principles coming up again and again. So there's this concept of underlying casualty notions of due care, given reasonably foreseeable causation, issues of negligent entrustment or reliance, the attribution of liability, the apportionment of liability, the allocation of loss in terms of but-for damages. These things affect insurance performance. They affect, the regulatory environment, the tort environment, and they will affect insurers' solvency. So the key here is you're navigating this narrow channel between tort and insolvency as an insurer. This is between, anybody remembers from high school reading The Odyssey, Scylla and Charybdis, between the devil and the deepest blue sea. The idea is, can you sail past the whirlpool without being consumed by the six-headed monster, Scylla? And what we're describing here is, if you think that the enterprise sale seems hard from the perspective of the person selling the service, prudent procurement and that decision is so much harder, and then reliable implementation harder still, and maintaining reliable implementation because of that razor's edge. As I think something that's come up in Vivian's presentation is, you're a user. You're not an owner of these systems, right? You don't have the visibility into the system, the transparency. There's an asymmetry of information and control, and your terms of service dictate what access and control you may have and how you use and apply it. And therefore, the level of stewardship is very different from if it was an owned resource, but the amount of liability you may have may be closer to that of someone who effectively in a previous world would have owned a piece of technology like this. And so you're navigating between the concept of discrimination suits, no coverage or high premiums for relative to relatively lesser risk. This might be systematic. If it is, there's a discrimination tort that may still ultimately lead to insolvency anyway, versus insolvency for inadequate premium due to, say, data bias or model misspecification or model creep. And these things are likely to become increasingly pervasive, insidious, ubiquitous, and that creep. I mean, for example, something as simple as pre-fill forms, data fields from pre-fill forms that are either corrupted or inaccurate, systematically resulting in risk being written in high-risk areas through error. So something as simple as a lift-generating recommendation system could easily result in feeding data into a critical system. Or someone says, hey, this thing already works. Why don't we just go use it over here? These are the kinds of issues where compounded propagated error of the model and of the data can lead to issues below the surface. And those issues, as I said, are, the devil versus the deep blue sea kind of problems that it's going to be a problem not just for the modelers, not just for the actuaries, not just for the underwriters, but for the C-suite, the chief underwriting officer, the board. We experienced this in the mortgage area previously with mortgages. We're now seeing something very similar in terms of model risk and model bias coming up in critical systems that insurers insure. Next slide, please. So this is the golem. And the golem is an interesting figure. It's I consider it the earliest instance of robotic process automation. It is cited also in Grimm's fairy tales. There's a version of this kind of golem story, and folks remember Disney's Wizard's Apprentice. So